Superbly situated in southern England's rural heartland, few destinations can match the amazing diversity of Salisbury and Stonehenge. Known as the city in the countryside, the magnificent medieval town of Salisbury has an incredible history. Originally built on an Iron Age hill fort at Old Sarum, it was moved in its entirety nearly 2 miles away in the 1200s. A fine example of a planned medieval town, Salisbury has largely preserved its original layout. One of the reasons that the town was moved in the 12th century is that the current location has an abundance of water. Indeed, the history of Salisbury has been greatly influenced by the 5 tributaries of the rivers that meet at the site: the Avon, Nadder, Wylie, Bourne and Eble. The main industries in Salisbury were all dependent on river water. Tanning, or leatherworking, was one of the more noxious trades associated with, and located besides, the rivers, and medieval Salisbury was the site of numerous tanners. Historic streets and alleyways, charming half-timbered buildings, traditional English houses, and picturesque shopping streets characterise the city of Salisbury. The citizenry was composed of skilled tradesmen and merchants who were the economic lifeblood of the city. In medieval society, town life was distinct from country life. The two were considered separate yet interdependent worlds. There were many manifestations of rural life in the city, with gardens, herds of livestock, and even farms located within the city walls. That said, townsmen saw themselves as distinct from country folk, and country folk viewed the cities with suspicion and envy. The Avebury parish church was significantly enlarged in the late 12th century, around the time that a church revival finally suppressed the lingering pagan beliefs that had survived until then. In the 13th century, the church's dedication was recorded as All Saints, but it now bears a dedication to St. James. Towns were much smaller than modern cities and were generally populated by just a few thousand people. Even the big cities could be measured in the tens of thousands, while a mere handful reached 100,000 or 200,000 inhabitants. Built on a human scale and remaining true to their roots, Wiltshire's settlements fit naturally into the surrounding landscape. The Stonehenge site is part of a larger complex of monuments that lie either side of the nearby River Avon. The National Trust protects large areas of the countryside throughout Wessex and ensures free open access to all of it. Stonehenge is one of the best known and yet most enigmatic prehistoric sites in the world. Over the centuries, there has been intense debate about the significance and intended use of Stonehenge. It is undoubtedly the focal point of a landscape filled with prehistoric ceremonial and burial structures. The Wiltshire region is known for having some of the most stunning scenic drives and picturesque landscapes in the area. The rural area is a county full of historical treasures and famous attractions such as Stonehenge and Avebury. The landscape of Wiltshire, as we see it today, is the product of a series of major changes through which its character has been transformed by the interaction of natural, human, and anthropogenic processes. Like most areas in Britain, the landscape of the county bears the imprint of successive periods of human inhabitation and land use. While the basic landforms have remained the same, the covering vegetation and designated land use have been subjected to constant change. These changes are important not only from an archaeological perspective, but also in determining the overall character of the county. Wiltshire has a proud farming tradition, which reaches back thousands of years. Around 72% of the county is currently farmed, which equates to an area of roughly 3,500 square kilometres. And farming continues to be an essential determinant of landscape character in all areas of the region. The stones represent an enormous investment of labour and time. Mammoth effort and great organisation was required to transport these stones tens and sometimes hundreds of kilometres across land and water, before then shaping and raising them. Only a sophisticated society could have mustered so large a workforce and produced the design and construction skills necessary to build Stonehenge and its surrounding monuments. The number of Bronze Age burial mounds in Wiltshire suggests a huge increase in population and a major impact in the opening up of the landscape. The county contains about 130 Neolithic long barrows, but evidence of at least 2,500 Bronze Age round barrows exists. Many of these were constructed in the early Bronze Age. Sometimes the barrows are highly visible on ridges and hilltops, while others follow the lines of valleys and streams. During the Middle Bronze Age from 1500 BC, round barrow construction continued, but the most dramatic change in the landscape was the widespread appearance of field systems defined by banks, ditches and possibly hedges. Associated with these fields were small enclosures containing roundhouses and ancillary buildings, which would have been the farmsteads of extended family groups. Stonehenge is one of the most impressive megalithic monuments in the world, on account of the sheer size of its menhirs, some of which weigh over 50 tons, the height of the monument and the exquisite perfection of its design, which is based around a series of concentric circles. Begun as a simple earthwork enclosure, it was built in several stages, with the unique lintelled stone circle being erected in the Neolithic period around 2500 BC. Stonehenge remained an important site well into the early Bronze Age, when many burial mounds were constructed in its vicinity. Stonehenge, together with Avebury and other associated sites, form the heart of a World Heritage Site with a unique and dense concentration of outstanding prehistoric monuments. Stonehenge's orientation in relation to the rising and setting sun has always been one of its most remarkable features. Yet it remains uncertain whether this was because its builders came from a sun-worshipping culture or because, as some have asserted, the circle and its banks were part of a huge astronomical calendar. What cannot be denied is the ingenuity of the builders of Stonehenge. With only very basic tools, such as antler picks and bone shovels at their disposal, they dug the enclosing ditch and erected the bank, later using similar tools to dig holes for the stones. Other stone tools were used to shape the mortises and tenons that linked uprights to lintels. Some of these tools can be seen together with other artefacts, including personal material from graves, on display in the museums at Salisbury and Devizes. The monument complexes at Stonehenge and Avebury provide an exceptional insight into the funerary and ceremonial practices in Britain in the Neolithic and Bronze Ages. Construction on the Great Monument began roughly 5,000 years ago, and the famous stones that still stand today were put in place about 4,000 years ago. The site evolved from a simple bank and ditch in the Neolithic period to a sophisticated stone circle built on the axis of the midsummer sunrise. The layout of the site was rearranged several times during the Bronze Age. The first monument at Stonehenge was a circular earthen bank and ditch called a henge, which can still be seen today. Unlike other henges, the ditch lies outside rather than inside the bank. During the second period of construction, from approximately 2900 to 2400 BC, wooden structures were added to the earthenwork enclosure. Excavations have revealed a complicated pattern of post holes in the centre of the henge, as well as at the northeastern and southern entrances. The third and final phase of Stonehenge's construction occurred between 2600 and 1600 BC, embracing a period of roughly 1,000 years. This phase is marked by a change from building in wood to building in stone. It can be divided into three stages. First, a crescent of blue stones from Wales, then the sarsen stone circle, and finally the rearrangement of the stones into their present form. The stones are aligned almost perfectly with the sunrise on the summer solstice, and it has been concluded that Stonehenge was built as a spectacular place of worship. The 18th century British antiquarian William Stukeley had noticed that the horseshoe of great trilithons and the horseshoe of 19 blue stones at Stonehenge opened up in the direction of the midsummer sunrise. It was quickly surmised that the monument must have been deliberately oriented and planned so that on midsummer's morning the sun rose directly over the heel stone, and the first rays shone into the centre of the monument between the open arms of the horseshoe arrangement. This alignment implied a ritualistic connection with sun worship, and it was generally concluded that Stonehenge was constructed as a temple to the sun. More recently, though, the astronomer Gerald Hawkins has argued that Stonehenge is not merely aligned with solar and lunar astronomical events, but can be used to predict other events such as eclipses. In other words, Stonehenge was more than a temple, it was an astronomical calculator. Myths, legends, and incredible explanations of its construction are linked to this mysterious site. According to 12th century pseudo-historian Geoffrey Monmouth, the monument's blue stones originated in Africa, where ancient giants scooped them up because of their healing properties and transported them to mythical Mount Kilorus in Ireland, where they formed the Giant's Circle. But when Aurelius Ambrosius, king of the Britons, wanted to create a memorial to slain warriors, the magician Merlin suggested to him that the stones would make excellent building material. The king sent an army to defeat the Irish in battle, but they were unable to move the stones, until Merlin used his sorcery to dismantle the structure and transport it across the sea, proving, in the process, that the supernatural was more potent than brute force. In 1620, the eccentric English architect Inigo Jones was commissioned by King James I to document the structure of Stonehenge and investigate its origin. In 1655, 3 years after Jones's death, his son-in-law and assistant, John Webb, published a book supposedly based upon notes left behind by the architect. The book depicts Stonehenge as the ruins of a Tuscan-style temple built by the Romans during their occupation of Britain in the 1st through 5th centuries AD to venerate Coelius, the Roman god of the sky. Stonehenge and Avebury are among the most famous groups of megaliths in the world. The two sanctuaries consist of circles of menhirs arranged in a pattern whose astronomical significance is still being explored. These holy places and the nearby Neolithic sites are an incomparable testimony to prehistoric times.